Feeling the need for change is at the heart of your ability to make it happen. Welcome to Turning Inward. I'm Vivian Carrasco, your midwife, teacher, and host for this podcast. Together, you and I are going to navigate the interior life, and we're going to do that by unearthing our personal truths, our own insight, and our inner knowing. These are weekly teachings that are brought to you by hard-nosed scientific evidence focused on spiritual direction with integrity and self-awareness. In 2 words, this is your inner work. I am wonderful.
Good. Excellent.
So great to connect with you.
You too. You too. Another Martha Beck coach, right?
Yes. Yes.
Excellent.
So you mentioned when you reached out that you're a free range, and that really that really piqued my curiosity. Please say more.
Oh, well, 2 years ago, when I left my corporate job, I very deliberately didn't take another one. And I gave most of my stuff away, and I gave up my apartment. And I really, after listening to Martha for a year, just wanted to do what excited me, what felt right in my heart and not my head. And so I gave myself a year. I saved up enough money to just do that for a year. I love to travel. I was going to be where I wanted to be, do what I wanted to do. And after a year, I reassessed. I sort of made an internal contract with myself, and things were going well enough financially, and I was certainly having a ton of fun and felt like I was being of service. So I kept going, and I re-upped my contract until September, and we'll see how it feels then. But that's sort of the quick overview.
Beautiful. Now, so when you say you re-upped your contract, is that for...
With myself.
Okay. So you wrote out an actual contract?
No, I didn't write it out. It was more just internal.
Ah, like a personal promise.
Right.
So you were a university professor, and what do you call yourself now besides free-range human?
Well, I am, it depends on the day and who's asking, but I'm a mindfulness-based coach and workshop facilitator, program developer, writer. Anything around mindfulness-based personal transformation as a vehicle for global transformation.
And how different is that from what you were doing before?
Well, it's not totally different. I just have the freedom now to go all in. I was trying to have to bring it in around the edges of what I was doing before. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the main goal per se. So I was squeezing it in here and there, but it wasn't full strength.
And tell me about the process, this unfolding process. You said listen to Martha for a year. So you also listened to your own heart.
I sure did. And the job it wasn't feeling like a great fit, but I had worked so hard to get there, and I was halfway through a doctoral program that they were paying for. So it kind of felt like it was a defining moment. Okay, who am I? Am I going to finish up this doctorate that doesn't really feel right for me in almost any way whatsoever, except as a vehicle for climbing further up this ladder that I don't even think I want to be on. So am I going to stay here? They were paying me. For me, it was very good money, and I was offered a promotion. And so on the outside, it all looked like it was great, but it just did not feel great, and it didn't feel like a good fit. So it didn't happen overnight. It probably took a few years of a lot of introspection, a lot of meditation, a lot of coaching to really sort it all out, because my head and my heart were diametrically opposed, and that was a hard place to be in.
And how did the people around you, how did that work out?
Well, a lot of them thought I was crazy, but I also think by that time I had honed my tribe so that I was surrounded by people who were like-minded, and enough people who were like-minded and like-hearted that they got it and they supported me and cheered me on. And that made it really a lot easier. And the people that thought I was crazy were the people that I was really trying to distance myself from anyway. So by the time I got to that point where I was totally clear that I needed to go, it didn't matter that those people thought I was crazy. It was sort of expected.
That's beautiful. Now, when I work with individuals, this idea of not having someone to support them is central to what's going on with them usually. So how did you hone your tribe?
Well, it was kind of deliberate. And then there was also some maybe divine intervention to it, where people just started dropping out of my life that had been there for a long time, some of them, in different ways. And at first I was really upset about it and disconcerted and what's going on and how come all these relationships are just dissolving. But then that made space for new people to show up and new relationships to form. And I was very in tune to who I wanted to be around. And when those people showed up, I resonated with them and recognized them and cultivated those relationships. So again, it was over time and it was deliberate and conscious, but it happened. And now it feels very, very good.
Say more about the good feeling.
Well, I think sometimes, I'll speak for myself. I stayed in relationships because I'd always been friends with that person, or I don't know, that was a nice person that I worked with. And so we've always stayed in touch, but it wasn't necessarily somebody that totally got me at a soul level or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so I started to be more conscious of my energy and protecting it, if you will, and trying to only be around those people that really light me up and that I feel like I can really light up. It's kind of mutual. And there's a feeling, a warmth that goes along with that. That's the more time that I spend in that space, the better I feel.
Pretty much 99.9% of everything you said resonates with my own personal story.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I think it's just one of the things that seems to be coming up a lot is this idea from someone who's in it, right? Who's in the middle of the storm, who's stepping in the mud, is this idea that it should be happening faster than it is. Yeah. So I like how you've said it happens over time. It's taken years. Because we're not patient as human beings, are we?
We're really not. We're really not.
Free range or not.
That's right. That's right. But my coach was very skilled and she just kept saying, it's not clear now, but it's going to get clear. It's going to get clear. And the suffering will increase if this isn't the right place. And so just wait and see and pay attention and it will become clear. And eventually she was right and it did.
And this paying attention, this noticing, you said earlier, you just noticed when somebody lit you up. What is some more sort of tangible things that the folks that are listening can look for? How do I know somebody lights me up? Because for a lot of us, before we get there, that has been pushed down and swept away for so long, we don't even recognize it anymore.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, I think, Vivian. Well, it's getting re-embodied first and getting more familiar with feelings. So feelings are the language of the body and thoughts are the language of the mind. And we're so accustomed to thinking, I should do this or I should like that, I should go after that person. But when we become more familiar with feelings in the body, as you know, isn't going to steer us wrong. And so it's how do you feel when you're around that person? How do you feel after you leave that person? Do you feel drained? Do you feel energized? Are you looking forward to seeing them again? Do you want a break? For me, it was all about the feeling.
Nice. Now, Erin, I took a peek at your website and you posted a poem there. And I'm just going to read one line about it because I wanted to see where our conversation would go with this. It's by Dana Faltz. And the line is, this is the day of your awakening.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, the only time we can awaken or change or transform or love or grow is now, is today. We can't do that yesterday. We can't do that tomorrow. It's now. And so that is one of the reasons why I love mindfulness and contemplative practice so much, is that it helps reacquaint us with now and being present. And any little micro awakenings or major awakenings that can happen are beautiful, but they can only happen now.
Now tell me about your practices. What are your favorite practices?
Well, I try every day to do just a sitting practice awareness of the breath, to come inward, come into the body, drop out of thinking, come into stillness. And then I also, on an almost daily basis, will do some loving kindness, which is another practice that has really helped transform things for me in a lot of ways. And yoga, too. I do a lot of yoga.
What form?
It's usually a vinyasa practice, a somewhat gentle vinyasa.
I'm a hot yoga, 80-minute.
I do that one sometimes. Not so much in the summer, though.
Oh, even in the summer. I can't get away from it. Yeah. I'm actually a yoga teacher in the same practice. So I'm a ladder person, too, right? So if there's a ladder, I just,
I get you.
Yeah. You said something about your practice, how it takes you out of your thinking. Now, if it takes you out of your thinking, Erin, and I'm sort of being provocative here, where does it put you?
In the body.
And how is that different from the thinking?
Well, it's very different. It's a different way of knowing the world. It's a different way of getting information. I think the number is 100. We have 100 million nerve cells in our gut, which is more than the brain. And so the language of the body and the feelings and the information that's there is real. And so it's good to check in, I think, and see what the body is saying. Where's their discomfort? Where is their ease? What's the climate? Yeah, there can be a ton of information.
Well, and for folks that are used to leaning on their intellect, those are data points. So if it's 1,000,000 to 1, which one should you trust more, right?
Well, yeah. And ultimately, that's what gave me the clarity around that whole work situation. My head never got on board, but my body was getting increasingly loud about the fact that this was not right.
How did it get loud?
It got tight, got congested. I could feel my muscles clenching when I was in there. I could feel my heart rate going up a little bit. And if I hadn't maybe been so in tune with my body, I wouldn't have noticed those things. But the more in tune I got, the more I noticed, and I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer.
I've heard it said often, I've probably said it here before 1,000,000 times, that we don't really move until the pain of staying is too much to bear.
I think that's absolutely right.
You mentioned earlier protecting your energy. I have to share that I just earlier this evening was in a spotlight session with Beverly Belling, and I am just now starting to explore the idea of energy. What is protecting your energy?
Well, I maybe mean it in a more concrete way than you're exploring with Beverly, but for me, it's being careful about how I spend my time, with whom I spend my time, because my time I feel like is the most precious thing that I have, and my presence is the most precious gift. And so, instead of saying yes to everything in my old people-pleasing ways, I take a pause when somebody asks me something or there's an opportunity to do something. And okay, is that really going to be what's in my best interest right now? Is that going to serve me? Is it going to serve a community? And if the answer is no, then I sometimes will say, no, thank you. Even if I don't have something else I'm doing necessarily, just being is something that I now prioritize. Whereas before, I would have said, yeah, I'm not doing anything. Let's go do that. But just the being is valuable time for me.
I agree with you. Now, what I hear from clients is, but I've got to get off the couch. I can't just be. And I know that when I think of being, I don't imagine or see being as a state of not doing. How are you referring to being?
Well, yeah, that's a good distinction. The being, it's not vegging out on the couch watching TV. It's not something mindless like that. If that's the case, that's for me not that skillful. It can be just sitting outside connecting with nature. It can be picking up one of the probably 30 books that I have that I want to read that I haven't gotten to. It can be working on a writing project that I have gotten away from. It could be trying out a new recipe that I have been wanting to try. So, or it might be sitting and being in stillness, depending on what's called for. So, yeah, I think you have to be a little judicious in terms of how you're defining that and how you're using that downtime. I think unfortunately what happens for so many people, and I've certainly been there, is that you're so exhausted from the grind that you come home and all you have energy for is vegging out, and you don't have energy to try anything, the new recipe or being outside in nature. You just want to veg and regroup because you know you have to do it all again the next day. So
Now you bring up a good point. When I work with beginning meditators or mindfulness or stillness practices, they often fall asleep.
Yes, absolutely. Because we're so sleep deprived as a culture.
They didn't even know they were tired.
Right. Right. Sleep is so vital. I don't know if Ariana Huffington is now a big proponent of sleep and even has nap rooms at the Huffington Post, and sleep is critical.
Well, I've said recently to a few people that this spirit needs a body that gets enough rest, and that's just a non-negotiable. But I did some research. I was coming of age, a woman of age, my gray tells stories. And there were 2 things that women over 40 can do to increase their vitality and, life longevity or whatever you want to say. One of them was not drinking alcohol because of the way a woman's body processes alcohol. And the second one was sleep.
That makes sense to me.
Me too.
But it's some badge of honor to not sleep a lot and to get more done. I don't know where that came from.
Now, getting more done, that's interesting. And I think this will be valuable for the folks that are listening. I find that when I'm rested, it's almost like Stephen Covey talks about sharpening the saw. When I'm rested and I'm present and I'm focused, I get so much more done in a smaller period of time than when I'm sort of dragging myself, pulling all-nighters or whatever it is to, quote, get something done. It's a different level of productivity that I don't think many of us have the experience, the embodiment of knowing, so we don't trust it.
I think you're absolutely right.
How can we trust this sharper energy and productivity more than this slogging through?
Well, I think everybody gets to decide for themselves how much suffering they want. And some people, some people like the old ways. They're used to it. It's comfortable, even though it's not serving them. Then there's a higher suffering quotient. They're more comfortable there, so they want to stay.
Well, but you brought up a good point. And because I don't like to get into coach talk, but since you're a coach, you brought up a really interesting thing. We don't take anyone out of their suffering. They make the choice to no longer suffer. I don't even encourage it. Like, you're ready when you're ready. Is that the way you practice?
Yes. Everyone gets to decide the free will. If you want to keep that suffering, go forth. God bless you. But look at the consequences. Look at it, see it clearly, and see how you've designed it that way. But yeah, if you're not ready to do anything about it, then that's totally fine. No judgment.
Exactly. Everyone's living out their own story. Yeah,
Right.
I would actually replace coaching with choice and self-mastery. That feels to me like more of what we do. We help people with that. Now, you said something about seeing clearly. Now, often, if we don't have an awareness that we're not seeing clearly, then we don't know that.
Well, that's right. That's why I think a relationship with somebody, whether you want to call it a coach or a mentor or whoever, that can reflect back, can be so super valuable. I had a coaching session for myself. I was coached this morning around something, and it always strikes me whenever I do it how helpful it is. No matter how much you sit and have your own practice or how many books you read, it's really another human hearing your story and reflecting it back and offering up their wisdom is inevitably helpful and illuminating.
And do you think part of that is because we're wired? Like, in addition to mirror neurons, we're just compelled to be in relationship with ourselves and others?
I do think that's part of it. And I also think we're just so habituated with our lenses from past experiences that sometimes we just can't see some of the other possibilities that another person can see because they have different life experiences and whatnot. So I think it's probably both of those.
How can someone sort of bring to mind and get more clarity on their habits and their patterns?
Well, by slowing down a little bit, I would say, and looking, seeing. I think it might be different for different people. Journaling might be helpful for someone. Meditation might be helpful for another person. Coaching, if people aren't ready to kind of sit in stillness, doing it that way with another person. There are lots of different ways, and maybe try all of them and just see what feels most helpful.
And that you bring up a good point, because there is no outline to follow because it is personal. Everyone's path is personal. And when I think of someone walking their path, they often want it to be concrete, but we're forging it. We're clearing it away.
Yes, I agree. It's intuitive. It's creative. It's not set in stone. It's always a moving target because we're always moving and shifting. So to say that, well, here are the 5 steps that you must take to do whatever, I think that might be a good starting point. But yeah, everybody's different. And everybody's different on every given day.
Mm-hmm. Because you've brought up some of the science, and I love the science, is I think that our cells regenerate at a pace where we are a completely new body every 7 years. I think that's fascinating.
That's such a great concept. It really is. And I love all the neuroscience too now that shows us that our brain is malleable. We can literally reshape it and make it look different and function differently depending on what we do with it. There are so many possibilities for us if we start tuning in and using our brains and our attention in different ways.
You're so right. The neuroplasticity in the last 10 years has blown up.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how, I don't know which speaker said it, so I'd love to attribute whoever said it, but the metaphor they used for this new sort of scientific breakthrough is the idea that our brain rests on tofu, right? And tofu takes on the taste of whatever you cook it with. And it's sort of wherever you let it rest, it's like on tofu with a Dyson spotlight.
I hadn't heard that, but I like it.
So you're like, wherever your focus is, wherever your attention, and you're just sucking it in, and you're literally like forming your brain in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Mm-hmm.
what,
yeah.
And I think that even though we as a society, especially here in the Western world, we go to the gym once, we don't expect to have muscles, but we don't have that sort of patience with our practice, our mindfulness, our stillness practice. We don't recognize the level of unpatterning that has to happen in order for it to Dyson in a new synapse.
Yes, definitely. I love that exercise analogy. And another one that I like is a musical instrument analogy, that our brain is so much more complex than any instrument, musical, electronic, computer, or otherwise. And yet most of us spend so little time tuning it. You would never take your most expensive violin out of the case and just start cranking on it and trying to play something. No, you tune it, you practice. But we, as a culture, haven't really valued doing that with our brains. And I think we're seeing some of the results of that out in the world.
Yeah. Now tell me where your clients get stuck the most and how you help them. Maybe one or two or three, and I'm looking for tips.
Well, I think those old stories are powerful, and it's hard to get people out of the old stories and the story fondling. And sometimes just pointing that out to people, that that's a story that you're telling yourself, and doing some labeling practice. So instead of launching into a story, pointing out that, okay, you're telling yourself a story that, or you're having a thought that, and just working a little bit with the language like that can be helpful and take you out of the deep connection to the content of the story. So labeling is one thing that I like to use. Let's see. I, of course, like the actual practice, even if it's 2 minutes, just to stop and breathe and check in. And just like the body responds to the brain responds to the body. So if you do some deep breathing, or Andrew Weil has this 4-7-8 breath where you breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. So if you're in a fight or flight and you're running for your life, there's no way you're going to stop and take a deep breath and hold it. So that signals to the body and the brain that things are safe. And so that can kind of take people down a notch and lower the cortisol. So that's another practice that I like. But as I said, it's pretty intuitive, and it just depends on what's going on with the given person on a given day.
I love that practice of the 4 in, hold for 7, 8 out. And one other thing to mention about that is that our bodies can't heal if they're in flight or flight.
Right.
We don't do anything but manage that anxiety until we flip the emergency switch back.
Absolutely. And that's where seeing those stories as light inducers and making that connection, that's what we think, and the stories that we tell ourselves have very real consequences for our physiology. And some people, many people, haven't made that connection. So just recognizing that and giving them a couple of tools to get out of that fight or flight is huge.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned labeling, one of the things as far as labeling as a sort of beginning practice for folks, I hear a lot of people say, I'm so angry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really true.
No, anger is arising.
I'm feeling anger.
Right. I love that. I try to do the same thing.
So that's wonderful.
Erin, even the internal language. I'm sorry, Vivian, but
ahead.
I'm so agreeing with you that the internal language that we use with ourselves, even if it's not out loud, really makes a difference.
Oh, if this was following an 80-20 principle, I think the internal language would be the 80%, because we say it without consciousness, like you said. There's no deliberateness around it. Mm-hmm. It's almost always, I should have, I didn't, I could have, and if we were a bit more gentle with ourselves as a beginning practice, I think that's a start.
Absolutely. It's a great start.
Yeah. So, Erin, what other sort of final words of wisdom or insight would you share with folks that are in the beginning stages of turning it inward, tuning into themselves and really struggling with, I won't be respected. My life will collapse. The sky is falling.
Mm-hmm. I would encourage people to trust themselves, trust the universe, that there's so much more support out there, perhaps, than you've let yourself believe. And it might take time. It probably will take time, but just keep taking tiny steps towards that which lights you up, towards that which feels like it's truer for you and better for you. And it may be super tiny, but over time, all those super tiny steps will take you someplace that feels better. And once you start having little tastes of that, I think it gets easier for people to take slightly bigger steps and slightly bigger steps, and you can pick up momentum over time. But go slow, trust yourself, get some help, get a tribe around you that support you and inspire you, and all sorts of wonderful things might be possible that you never could have imagined.
Amen. Because that never could have imagined. It's always bigger than from my experience.
So much better and bigger than I ever could have orchestrated with my own little self.
Yes. I'm like, seriously? And it can only get better.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
So, Erin, if someone's looking for you, where would they find you?
My company is called Mindfulness and Magic. It's erinsharaf.com, and they can find me there, and there are links there to my Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you so much for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much, Vivian. It was a pleasure.
If you want more help moving forward and breaking out of a negative mental pattern, I personally host an online community of practice for smart, successful women and a few super cool dudes that gives you more support, tailored training, and an unlimited professional coaching. Visit my digital home at viviancarrasco.com to learn more.